$5,000. That's what the Big Dipper sold for at auction in June 2008. A roller coaster designed by John Miller, the man who invented the modern roller coaster, building 1925 for $50,000, which is about $880,000 today. It survived the Great Depression. It survived a direct hit from a tornado in 1942. It survived a fire that burned every building around it in 1952. It did not survive Cedar Fair Entertainment Company. The buyer planned to move it. He never did. For 8 more years, the Big Dipper stood on the shore of a spring-fed lake in Aurora, Ohio. Its white paint peeling down to gray wood, its track warping under the weight of seasons it was never meant to endure standing still. Then they tore it down. Geauga Lake operated for 120 years. It closed via a PDF press release on a Friday afternoon. The lake came first. 60 acres of spring-fed water sitting in a glacial depression on the border of Geauga and Portage counties, about 30 miles southeast of Cleveland. In 1856, the Erie Railroad laid tracks along its southern edge, and a man named Sullivan Giles figured out that a train stop next to a lake was a business model. By 1872, he had a picnic ground running on the North Shore, fishing, swimming, camping, a place to escape the coal smoke and foundry heat of industrial Northeast Ohio. People called it Giles Pond. In 1887, the picnic grove became an amusement park, and the early years had a sweetness to them that makes everything that followed feel like a betrayal. A steam-powered carousel showed up in 1889. A steamboat towed a barge with a dance floor across the lake. In 1888, they hosted Major League Baseball games on a diamond built near the water. This was leisure before leisure became an industry. No brand consultants, no per capita spending metrics, no leveraged buyouts. Just a lake, a train, and the logic that people with a day off would pay a little money to enjoy both. By the 1920s, the automobile had replaced a trolley, and Geauga Lake was offering free parking for 5,000 cars. In 1925, the park made the investment that would define its skyline for the next 80 years. The Skyrocket, later renamed the Big Dipper, was a wooden roller coaster designed by John Miller, 65 feet tall, with 2,680 feet of track. At the time of its opening, it was the largest roller coaster in the world. The park grew around it: an Olympic-sized swimming pool, a theater, a dance hall, a bowling alley. Big band acts performed on summer weekends. For the corridor of blue-collar workers stretched between Pittsburgh and Detroit, the highest concentration of high-paid industrial labor in the country, Geauga Lake was the backyard. The chain lift clicking upward, the smell of popcorn cutting through lake air, the neon reflecting off wet concrete after a summer rain. Generations of families build their summers around that sound, that smell, that light. A fire in 1952 destroyed the bowling alley, the theater, the dance hall, and the roller rink. $500,000 in damage, roughly $5.8 million today. The ownership made a decision that seemed practical at the time. Instead of rebuilding the year-round facilities, they'd run Geauga Lake as a seasonal amusement park and swimming area. The park survived. But the shift was already pointing toward a future where thrills would replace community, and the accountants would replace the families who ran the place. In 1969, a Cleveland-based company called Funtime Incorporated bought the park. Funtime was run by Earl Gascoigne, a former Cedar Point executive who understood something fundamental about the Ohio market. Geauga Lake could never outmuscle Cedar Point. It didn't need to. It needed to be a different kind of park, regional, family-scaled, the place you went 6 times a summer instead of once. Gascoigne's smartest move had nothing to do with rides. He convinced SeaWorld to build its second marine park directly across the lake from Geauga Lake. 2 parks, 2 separate owners, 2 separate gates, functioning as a single destination. Families would spend the morning watching Shamu, cross the road, and ride coasters until dark. SeaWorld was the animal park. Geauga Lake was the iron park. Neither tried to be what the other was, and the equilibrium held for 30 years. Under Funtime, the ride lineup grew steadily. The Double Loop arrived in 1977, the first coaster in Ohio with 2 consecutive vertical loops. The Corkscrew followed in 1978. In 1988, the Raging Wolf Bobs, a wooden coaster modeled after the legendary Bobs at Chicago's Riverview Park, opened for the park's centennial. These weren't record breakers. They were solid, well-maintained rides that kept a loyal regional audience coming back. Funtime's management was lean, local, and focused on the guest standing in front of them rather than the shareholder reading a quarterly report. That model, stable, sustainable, rooted in a specific place, was about to become worthless to the people who valued growth above everything else. In 1995, a company called Premier Parks bought Funtime for $60 million. Premier was run by Kieran Burke and Gary Story, and they were not in the business of running neighborhood amusement parks. They were in the business of buying them, injecting capital, inflating attendance numbers, and leveraging the growth to buy more parks. It was a roll-up strategy, the same financial logic that has consumed veterinary clinics, local newspapers, and funeral homes across the country. Buy, optimize, scale, repeat. Premier went public in 1996 and raised nearly $70 million. They bought The Great Escape. They bought Kentucky Kingdom, and in 1998, they executed their masterstroke. They acquired the entire Six Flags chain from Time Warner for $1.86 billion. Premier Parks adopted the Six Flags name, and overnight, a small picnic grove-turned amusement park in Aurora, Ohio, was a piece on the board of the largest regional theme park operator in the world. The culture shock at the gate was immediate. Off-the-shelf catalog rides started appearing. A Vekoma Boomerang here, a Vekoma SLC there. The family atmosphere eroded as the park chased the teenage thrill demographic. But the real damage was still a season away. For the year 2000, Six Flags rebranded Geauga Lake as Six Flags Ohio and dumped $40 million into the property in a single season. 4 roller coasters went up simultaneously. Batman, Night Flight, the longest floorless coaster in the world, a B&M custom build that dominated the skyline. Superman, Ultimate Escape, an Intamin impulse coaster that launched riders up a 180-foot vertical spike. The Villain, a massive wooden coaster from CCI meant to bridge the gap between the Big Dipper and the Steel Giants. And Roadrunner Express for the family market. Looney Tunes characters danced on the midways. The DC Comics Trinity adorned every flat surface. This was a declaration of war. Cedar Point sat 60 miles to the west in Sandusky. Six Flags was planting its flag in Cedar Point's backyard, betting $40 million that it could siphon the thrill-seeking audience from the most famous coaster park on Earth. The strategy had a name in the industry, the Coaster Wars. The assumption was simple: more rides, more records, more guests, more revenue. The assumption was wrong. Aurora, Ohio, is a township of 2-lane country roads. The infrastructure was built for a regional family park drawing 1 million visitors a year, not a mega destination chasing 3 million. By 2001, guests were sitting in traffic for hours before they reached the parking lot. The sensory experience of Six Flags Ohio started not with the click of a chain lift, but with the idle of a car engine on Route 43. In January 2001, Six Flags made the decision that sealed the property's fate. They bought SeaWorld Ohio from Busch Entertainment for $110 million in cash. The 2 parks, the Thrill Park and the Marine Park, that had peacefully coexisted as neighbors for 3 decades, were merged into a single 700-acre operation called Six Flags Worlds of Adventure. 700 acres, 3 experiences, rides, water park, marine life, under one ticket. The largest amusement park in the world by landmass. Gary's story called it a bigger-than-life experience. It was a $170 million bet, the SeaWorld purchase plus the coaster expansion, built on a foundation of mismatched cultures and shattered infrastructure. The problem wasn't just traffic, it was physics. The two parks were separated by a lake. Six Flags built a floating bridge and a ferry system, but funneling tens of thousands of people across a body of water created bottlenecks that turned a day at the park into an exercise in crowd management. The deeper problem was brand. SeaWorld had been a polished, quiet, educational experience. Families watching dolphins, learning about ocean conservation, buying stuffed orcas at the gift shop. Six Flags was a loud, high-turnover thrill operation where teenagers rode coasters until they were dizzy and the midway smelled like funnel cakes and body spray. Merging the two didn't create a super destination. It created a place where nobody felt at home. Families who came for the whales were repelled by the chaos on the ride side. Coaster enthusiasts had zero interest in sitting through an educational dolphin show. To fill the park, Six Flags dropped season pass prices to $49.99. Unlimited access to all three worlds for the price of a decent dinner. The industry calls this giving away the gate. The theory is that cheap admission drives massive attendance, and the money comes from food and merchandise once guests are inside. The reality was different. The $50 price point turned Worlds of Adventure into subsidized daycare. Line jumping and fights became routine. The guests, drawn by bargain tickets, didn't spend the money inside the park that the model required. Attendance peaked at 2.7 million in 2001 and began falling immediately. By 2003, it was under 2 million. Meanwhile, the cost of operating a park that required marine biologists and tiger handlers, alongside ride mechanics, was bleeding the company dry. Six Flags as a corporation was carrying over $2 billion in debt from its global acquisition spree. And the Cleveland market, the one they had bet $170 million on dominating, was deemed too tough. They needed to sell fast. In March 2004, weeks before opening day, Cedar Fair announced it was purchasing Six Flags Worlds of Adventure for $145 million. Six Flags had invested roughly $180 million in the property, $110 million for SeaWorld, plus roughly $70 million in rides and infrastructure over 4 years. Cedar Fair got it all for $35 million, less than the cost of the assets on the ground. Industry analysts had a word for the deal. They called it a fire sale. They also had a theory about why Cedar Fair was buying. Cedar Fair's flagship property was Cedar Point, the park that Six Flags had just spent half a decade and 9 figures trying to destroy. Cedar Point sat 60 miles west. Geauga Lake was the only major competition in the region, and now Cedar Fair owned both. CEO Dick Kinzel rebranded the park back to Geauga Lake and told the community he had a 3-year turnaround plan. The local reaction was relief. The hometown park had been rescued from the corporate chaos of Six Flags, returned to its original name by a company that understood Ohio amusement parks. What the community saw as a rescue, the spreadsheets told as something else entirely. Cedar Fair moved fast. They shuttered the entire wildlife side immediately. No expertise in animals, they said. The whales and dolphins were shipped to Six Flags parks in California and New Jersey. The SeaWorld facilities that families had visited for 30 years, the orca tanks, the aquariums, the educational exhibits, went dark overnight. Cedar Fair converted that land into a standalone water park called Wild Water Kingdom, which they built for $26 million. The amusement park kept the Geauga Lake name, but it had been cut in half. Without the Six Flags license, Every ride lost its branding. Batman, Night Flight, became Dominator. Superman, Ultimate Escape became Steel Venom. Mind Eraser became Head Spin. The rides were the same steel and the same track, but the names were generic. The IP was gone, and the marketing budget that Six Flags had used to plaster the park across regional television disappeared with it. Attendance in 2004 collapsed to roughly 700,000, a 75% drop from the 2001 peak. The park that had been designed for millions now hosted thousands. Guests walked through vast, empty plazas built for crowds that would never come. The energy evaporated. A theme park without a crowd isn't charming. It's unsettling. Then the dismantling began. In 2006, Cedar Fair removed X-Flight and shipped it to Kings Island, where it became Firehawk. Steel Venom was pulled out and sent to Dorney Park, where it became Possessed. These were not surplus rides. They were the crown jewels, the most modern, most expensive coasters on the property. Removing them and installing them at other Cedar Fair parks was the financial equivalent of stripping copper wire from a house you own and selling it to your other houses. The coaster enthusiast community watched it happen in real time. The catch-and-kill theory wasn't a theory anymore. In June 2007, the Raging Wolf Bobs derailed. Cedar Fair chose not to repair it. The park's best wooden coaster, built for its centennial, was abandoned in place. Spring and fall operating hours had already been eliminated. By the final summer, Geauga Lake only ran from Memorial Day to Labor Day, a schedule that told anyone paying attention exactly what was coming. The 2007 season ended on Sunday, September 16th. There was no farewell event, no commemorative merchandise, no final ride ceremony. The park simply closed for what everyone assumed was the winter. 5 days later, on Friday, September 21st, Cedar Fair issued a press release. Geauga Lake's amusement park would not reopen. The company cited business reasons and said it would focus exclusively on Wildwater Kingdom, a 120-year-old institution killed by a press release on a Friday afternoon. Season pass holders were left with worthless plastic. The community of Aurora was blindsided. There had been no public warning, no town hall, no opportunity for a final visit. The people who had grown up riding the Big Dipper, who had watched their children ride it, who had planned to bring their grandchildren, they found out the same way they found out about everything else in the corporate era. They read it online. The auction happened in June 2008. The Big Dipper, Miller's masterpiece, the park's heartbeat for 80 years, sold for $5,000. The Villain, a coaster that cost roughly $8 to $10 million to build in 2000, went to a scrap dealer for around $30,000. The Double Loop, the first two-loop coaster in Ohio, sold for scrap at $25,000. The 1937 Aliens Carousel was shipped to Worlds of Fun in Kansas City. Dominator, the former Batman, Night Flight, was relocated to King's Dominion in Virginia, where it still operates. The steel rides survived because they could be unbolted and trucked to other properties. The wooden rides, the ones rooted in the ground, like the park itself, were destroyed. For 9 years after, a surreal scene played out on the lake. Wildwater Kingdom continued operating on the south side. Guests floating down the lazy river could look across the water and see the skeleton of the Big Dipper on the north shore. White paint gone gray, tracks sagging, weeds climbing the structure. The empty observation tower, cracked concrete midways where cotton candy carts once stood. It was a split-screen image of corporate logic, one half monetized, the other half rotting. Separated by the same 60 acres of spring-fed water where Sullivan Giles had once set up a picnic ground, Cedar Fair closed Wildwater Kingdom on September 5th, 2016, and abandoned the property entirely. The land sat in limbo for years, caught between the competing zoning visions of Aurora and Bainbridge Township. Eventually, the developers arrived. Industrial commercial properties, Pulte Homes. The 550-acre site is now being converted into residential subdivisions and commercial retail. Ranch homes and townhomes sell for $340,000 to $590,000. The streets are named Dipper Lane and Memory Lane, a linguistic bandage over a wound the developers didn't inflict but are profiting from. In 2024, the city of Aurora purchased 48 acres of lakefront property, including the lake itself, for $5.3 million. The plan is a public beach and non-motorized boating, a return to the 19th century origins of the site. As if the century of roller coasters and orca tanks and corporate warfare was a long detour back to a picnic ground on a spring-fed lake. In 2024, Six Flags and Cedar Fair merged into a single $8 billion company. The two corporations that waged a proxy war on the soil of a small Ohio town, inflating and then killing the park that stood between them, are now the same corporation. The competition that supposedly justified every decision, the $40 million expansion, the $110 million SeaWorld purchase, the $145 million fire sale, the slow dismantling, the Friday afternoon press release, that competition no longer exists. It was absorbed into a single line item on a consolidated balance sheet. Today, if you drive down Route 43 through Aurora, you pass a Liberty Ford dealership where the park entrance used to be. The only coasters left are the ones running at Cedar Point and King's Dominion, parks that fed on Geauga Lake's bones. Did you ever ride the Big Dipper? Did your family do the SeaWorld to Geauga Lake double feature on a summer Saturday? Drop that memory in the comments. Those stories are the only archive this place has left. If the real stories behind the places that shaped American summers are why you're here, subscribe. The Big Dipper is gone. The lake is still there.